This is Call on the Field Stands. Jeff Mapus and Ryan Denchef ready to get into it after a wild past week, given what we saw play out in the Thursday night NFL game. Got our beer here, sipping on some New Juice IPA from Southern Tier, and Ryan has the classic Bud Heavy.
Yes, sir. Per usual, every week, in and out. Let's go. But in a couple weeks, we will have the old home brew that I mentioned a couple weeks back that we brewed up. My buddy and I bottled it up this past weekend, and it is currently sitting about 10 feet away from where I'm standing, conditioning in the bottles, ready to go in a week or two. So maybe next week this time we'll be reporting back on the flavor and the taste of the old home brew. So we'll see.
Looking forward to that.
Oh, yes.
Hopefully it's a tasteful
delight. I guess we'll find out. Could be fucked up. Who knows? Usually I try to do it in the fermentation stage for like 2 weeks, maybe a little longer. This was like 4 weeks, so we may fucked it up. We'll see.
Looking
I got
forward
high hopes,
to it.
but we'll see.
Kinda. I'll bring a 6-pack just in case.
Just in case, yeah. I would advise to do that, yes.
So, Ryan, Thursday night, we witnessed one of the better players in the league strike a cat in the head with his own helmet.
Yes. Something that we obviously broke down in greater detail and length for the Browns episode of this podcast. But we obviously can't go through this main episode without talking about Myles Garrett cracking Mason Rudolph in the noggin with his own helmet. Dude, I mean, there's not a whole lot more we can say. If you want to really hear more detail and the whole in-depth conversation that Ref and I have, fire up the beginning of the Browns episode where we really dive into it. But, I mean, I guess the sentiment is he was wrong. It was really fucked up. He deserves every bit of his penalty in all of the game suspension that he received. As a Browns fan, I still think he should be and is rightfully so suspended for the rest of the season. Heinous act. No business in the league for that. It's inexcusable, and he deserves every bit of it. And all the talk about, I guess locally, we're hearing more of this, I would imagine, than anywhere else. But you're hearing, Mason Rudolph started it. And if Mason Rudolph didn't grab him in the helmet, twist his neck, and kick him in the dick, he would have never instigated it. I don't care. You don't hit another dude in the skull with his own fucking helmet. Bottom line. So, yeah. I don't know what you have more to say about from, like I said, we just did our Browns episode. If you are listening to this first and you're interested to hear our full-scale 20 or so minute talk about this whole situation, fire that up. But for a recap of that discussion, Jeff, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are pretty much echoing what you just said. My advice to all Cleveland Browns fans out there, don't get too hell-bent on bitching about Mason Rudolph not being suspended because he instigated it and all that jazz. Don't make it sound like you're trying to justify Myles or play it off or anything like that. The fact is, I don't give a shit what else happened. I can't control, what suspension or no suspension Mason Rudolph got. Myles deserves the punishment he got. It is what it is. We don't have him. I don't give a shit about the Steelers and what their outlook is anymore and their involvement. It is what it is. Browns will have to figure out how to win without Myles Garrett for the rest of the year. There's no way he wins the appeal process to get it reduced. Let's just hope, as a Browns fan, it doesn't extend into next year if they want to make some noise next year. And I understand Pouncey needed a suspension for the Steelers, but I totally respect, it's ride or die. I want to see our offensive lineman out there protecting our quarterback at all costs.
Dude, damn right.
He went after Myles and, started punching him. Maybe the kicking was a little much, but dude, I still love the fucking ride or die mentality. Like, you just hit my quarterback egregiously, I'm going to fuck you up any way I can. So it's one of those things where, yeah, you got to retaliate, but it's got to be punished. I mean, you can't just say, oh, yeah, you kicked Myles in the head while he was down, but Myles hit the quarterback first, so you get a pass. You got to punish it, but at the same time, you got to protect your quarterback. So I respect what Pouncey did. I actually love it. Got to do the time for the crime. Just comes with it.
Yeah. And, the other thing is there was comments about should he be suspended, going back to Myles Garrett, should Myles be suspended for the result or from the action? Some people were saying, oh, well, he didn't get injured. It could have been way worse. He could have cracked open his head, but he didn't. It's one of those situations where you almost like punch a guy and miss kind of thing. But no, you swing a fucking helmet at a dude and connect, you're done.
Dude,
you're done.
If he happens to be gripping the helmet, if you flip the helmet 180 degrees, and now the crown of the helmet is hitting his head. Woo!
We'd see a skull split open on national TV. That's not something we want to see in the league. He's going to get made an example of, and honestly, rightfully so. Even as a Browns fan, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it or defend Myles or anything like that. He was wrong. It was real fucked up. Should never happen in the league, and it did. So he gets his games, and he should hopefully learn from it. Hopefully move on. He's not going to get kicked out of the league or anything like that. So, learn from it. Don't do it again. Become a better human being and a better person for the action. And not that he's a bad human being, but just kind of learn from it and take it as a learning opportunity. It's unfortunate that the Browns are going to lose him for the remainder of the season. Arguably the best defensive pass rusher in the league. And, it's going to suck. They're going to need him, but got to move on. They got a ton of talent. As mentioned in the other podcast episode, the Browns one, he's not the most important player on the Browns. That's kind of the ultimate state of the Browns. So as long as it's not Baker Mayfield, they got a chance, in my opinion. So, learn from it. He deserves his suspension, and it was fucked up. So pretty much all we can really say about that. And like I said, if you want to hear the full conversation where we really dive into this a lot more, fire up the Browns breakdown episode that is posted probably a day before you're listening to this. Hopefully, if you're listening to it when it first gets posted, but I believe I'm going to post this the day after the Browns episode. But anyways, whenever you're listening to this, check that out. We get into more detail. But I guess that's pretty much all we really want to say about the Browns. Myles Garrett. Jeff, what's next on the list here as we move along? Like I said, after getting into more depth on the other episode of that.
We're 11 weeks through the NFL season, which is crazy. Pretty much every team has played 10 games. So
I think the bye weeks are over, right? Or is there
There might still be some buys for certain teams. But many of them have been had already. And
yeah.
What's crazy is
the Chiefs, the Cardinals, the Vikings.
They've all played 11.
No, these teams have a bye
coming up.
Yes, because I pulled up my fantasy team and I have a lot of bye weeks this week.
Yeah, that sucks.
Cardinals, Chargers, Chiefs. They all have buys. Probably somebody else out there. Fuck it. Look it up, people. Google exists.
Yeah. Because Chiefs have played 11 games through 11 weeks, whereas a lot of the other teams have only played 10. But
yeah.
Instead of giving we've given power rankings in the past, listing our top 10. Now the playoff picture is kind of taking shape.
Let's get into that and get into where we're at so far as the playoff standings and teams that are out of it. We can kind of mention those and kind of move past. But there's a lot of teams that are still in the hunt. There's a lot of teams that are holding on to relevancy. There's a lot of teams that are kind of dwindling a little bit as of late who one would assume should still be in it, but are kind of on the back burner of the end of the playoff push. So let's get into that a little bit. So what does the playoff picture right now look like? Go through the seeds real quick, set the tone, and then we'll kind of get into what's going on in a more bigger picture.
So we'll go conference by conference, starting with the AFC. Right now, first seed and second seed, respectively, are the New England Patriots and the Baltimore Ravens. Right now, getting that bye in the first week of the playoffs. Then going on down to the third and fourth seeds, we got the Kansas City Chiefs, who are projecting at the third spot with a 7-4 record, and the Indianapolis Colts at the fourth seed. And then rounding out the wild card spots, those were the division winners. We get the Bills as the fifth seed at 7-3, and the Texans at 6-4, getting that last spot. Some of the other teams in the hunt in the wild card. I'm going to read off the 4 here. Raiders are 6-4. They're kind of right on the bubble there on the wild card. I think they might be one of the more surprising teams this year. With
I agree.
Being at that 6-4 spot.
I believe in the Raiders too. I believe in the Raiders.
Yeah, I think so. Then you got the Steelers sitting at a 500 record. I think they're going to fall off. Correct. I don't think they're going to be in the race. And then the Titans, I think the same thing. Correct. They're at 500, 9th seed, not going to be in the hunt. But then you got the Browns projected at the 10th seed as things stand today. Obviously, we hit on the Browns more so in our Browns breakdown episodes. But I think they have a better shot based on talent that they have over the Steelers and Titans. So, yeah, that's the top 10. What are your thoughts on how things shake out from here based on those teams, those 10 teams we listed? Obviously, I think we both think the Steelers and Titans aren't really major factors, and it really comes down to the Browns jumping those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't have really much faith in the Titans. I mean, who's their quarterback even? Is Ryan Tannehill still starting for them? I mean, they poop.
If you're benching your QB like that during the year, you're just not going to make the playoffs.
Hey, they beat the Chiefs.
Unless it's for Baker Mayfield like last year where we were kind of made it interesting there at the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't really have faith in the Titans. You know, they have a tough schedule coming up with the Jags, Colts, Raiders, Texans, Saints, and Texans again. You know, sitting at, what'd you say, 5-5 with that schedule remaining. I don't really have a lot of faith in them. Steelers, on the other hand, do have a much easier schedule, similar to the Browns. You know, they play the Bengals and the Browns, whether you don't want to call that an easier game. They play the Cardinals and the Bills and the Jets, then the Ravens. So a little bit tougher than what the Browns have. But again, as you mentioned, their offense is atrocious. Mason Rudolph is not a playoff quarterback. I don't really see them being able to overcome their offensive woes. You know, last year we saw them without Le'Veon Bell and all that kind of stuff. You know, they're not the same team as last year. Big Ben, the drop-off from Big Ben to Mason Rudolph is astronomical. They're atrocious on offense. Their defense is legit, but I just don't think they're going to have enough to beat, you know, the Bills or the Ravens or the Steelers, or the Browns. And they very well may lose to the Cardinals as well. I think the Cardinals are kind of trending in the right direction with that young team, much like the Browns. Young team, first-year first-year head coach, also have a rookie quarterback, Cardinals do. So, you know, they're kind of trending in the right direction. Steelers at 5-5. Let's say they got to win, 4 of their next remaining games. The Bengals wash that up to a win. Jets probably wash that up to the win. They might not win against any of the other teams on their schedule. If I have that, you know, standings correct.
Bengals and the Jets are the only 2 teams that it's like you should win.
Right.
You should chalk those up as wins.
So the other 4 games, Bills, Browns, Cardinals, Ravens. Hard time seeing them win 2 of those.
Yep.
So I don't really have a whole lot of faith in the Steelers. And like I said, Titans, same kind of situation. Their schedule just shapes up to not be very good, especially with the offense that they're playing with. Even though they put up 35 points against the Chiefs, who have been playing a lot better on defense, at least in last week's game, or this past Monday night. I mean, the playoff picture as a whole, I don't really see the Patriots relinquishing the top seed. Ravens might kind of push for it, but I don't really see one of those teams, more or less, is my opinion. But I don't think the Patriots are going to relinquish that top seed. I think they're going to, once again, have that bye week. Probably, once again, walk into the AFC Championship for the 9th straight season or 8th
It's almost a
season
guarantee
or something stupid
that
like that.
You can peg them in the championship game.
So, you know.
Like, I could see the
like
Ravens
8 or 9 weeks
relinquishing the 2nd seed. More so over them taking the 1st seed over the Patriots.
Yeah, with the Chiefs sitting right there. You know, the Chiefs' defense has actually been stepping up a little bit, and their offense has kind of fallen back a little bit. You know, Pat Mahomes comes back, and the offense hasn't clicked on all cylinders like we anticipated it to, particularly last week, I should say, Monday night, yesterday, that game. I still do have plenty of faith in the Chiefs, though. I mean, Pat Mahomes is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league. Their schedule isn't that ideal, to say the least. They play the Raiders, they play the Pats, then the Broncos, then the Bears, then the Chargers. So it's not the toughest schedule. Obviously, the Patriots, it's going to be a huge game and mean a lot for the seeding in the playoffs. But ultimately, I do see the Chiefs winning that division, and I don't really think it's going to be all that close. I do still think the Raiders, though, are a sneakishly decent team and a sneaky team that could make some damage happen. And their schedule also, we're talking about schedules, and when we're projecting ahead, the Raiders' schedule shapes up. They've got the Jets, then like I said, against the Chiefs the next week, but then they have the Titans, Jags, Chargers, and Broncos. So I ultimately, like I said, do think the Chiefs will pull it through just because of that experience level, just because they have Pat Mahomes and that kind of talent. I don't know at this moment what the hamstring situation is with Tyreek Hill. I will have to look that up, but assuming he's going to return with relative health and relatively quickly, I ultimately do think, especially with, like I said, the way the Chiefs defense played last night against Chargers, they looked good. I do think the Chiefs ultimately pulled that through, but I am going to say I think the Raiders will probably win that playoff spot, or it's certainly going to be close depending on what happens with the Bills, who I think will ultimately drop off. But I don't know. What do you kind of see outlook-wise? I guess, all right, so before I pass it to you, I think Patriots, Ravens, probably going to win those two divisions with these. Do still think the Chiefs will pull it out. Colts probably will still get it done. I kind of been saying that for a while. We'll see kind of if the health holds up for Jacoby. I think it probably will. Hopefully that it does. But I do still kind of think the Colts are going to pull it through. And then my wild card teams, I do think the Raiders actually slip up there. Let me pull up the Bills' schedule really quick, because if they have a bunch of easy-ass games, maybe my opinion will change. But
they're mixed, man. The Bills have to play the Broncos, the Boys, Ravens, Steelers, Patriots, and Jets. So there's a couple easy ones there, but I mean, the Boys, Ravens, Patriots, and then even the Steelers at times. I mean, they're not like just you can't just walk over them. So
they've got 7 wins. A team that's, I think, going to push the Bills, and a team that they're going to have to look out for, actually, and not just because I'm a Browns fan, but the Browns, I think, could make some noise in that. And obviously the Browns beating the Bills, if they're both 9-7, would have the tiebreaker in that situation. It's going to be interesting. So they need 3 wins will guarantee them a spot. So let's say
they have 2, the Broncos and Jets.
Broncos and Jets, they should win that. Then they got Cowboys, Ravens, Steelers, and Pats. It's going to be tight.
We're going to have to goddamn root for the Steelers against them.
Yeah, we will, which means it's going to make the division interesting. But if the Browns can beat the Steelers next week after they handle the Bills or the Dolphins, the tiebreaker will be in the Browns' favor. That'll be big. Especially, like I said, same thing with the Bills. That's going to be big, that win over them a couple weeks back. It's shaping up to be interesting. I mean, there's some games that you would think a playoff team needs to win. Like if the Bills are a playoff team, they're going to need to beat the Steelers and the Broncos and the Jets to get to 10 wins, and they're a playoff team. If they lose one of those games, rightfully so, they might not be a playoff team. They're not a team that deserves to get in at that point if they lose the third to last game against the Steelers. But you know what? Fuck it. Browns, final playoff spot. With the tiebreaker, both 9-7 against the Bills. Browns have the tiebreaker. They're going to get in over the Bills. That's my prediction. Because I like the Browns, and I like to be optimistic. So let me pass it to you. What's your outlook? What do you think?
Dude, the records are going to be interesting down the stretch because...
And when you look at the schedules and how it shapes up, and the teams that they play,
what's crazy is...
It's going to be interesting.
When you look at the Colts and the Texans, since they're in the same division, they play each other for one next game on their schedule. They play each other. But then Houston still has to play the Patriots, where the Colts don't. So the next 2 games for the Texans are the Colts and Patriots. Tough 2 weeks, and they need to win.
Do the Texans play the Saints?
They do not.
Okay.
Whereas the Colts do.
Correct.
So, you got to...
Colts' schedule is shaping up, though.
That's where I was going with it. The Colts' schedule shapes up a little bit more to my liking than the Texans.
Agreed.
So,
and with Jacoby healthy... I've been saying it all along.
That was a big question.
They lose him in the Pittsburgh game. They lose that game. He doesn't play the following game, and they lose that game as well. to the fucking Dolphins. For the love of God. We're talking about the Browns, and they should waltz over the Dolphins. The Colts lost at home to the fucking Dolphins. So, it might not be that big a walkover.
Right.
But the healthy Jacoby, particularly paired with their schedule, I don't see the Colts.
The crazy thing is, Houston is sitting at 6-4 right now. They could lose to the Colts and Patriots next 2 games and be 6-6. But their last 4 games, man, the Broncos, Titans, Bucks, and the Titans again. Like, they could realistically win,
run it out,
and be 10-6, man. The playoff picture in the AFC, it's going to be difficult to make it in, man.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah, when we talk about the Browns,
you could have 2 10-6 teams from the same division.
Yeah.
Houston and
you might have
the
2 10-6 wild card teams. 9 wins might not be enough this year, to be honest.
It might not, because you and I just said, the Raiders are no slouch, and they're sitting at 6-4.
Right. But, I mean, the only thing, and we even kind of mentioned, like, I think a lot of these teams that are really, like, shit and tanking, like the Bengals and the Dolphins, if you kind of want to throw them, even though they beat the Colts, the Redskins, the Jets, these teams being so terrible are going to they're going to have a lot of teams get a lot more wins. Like, it's going to be a lot more tight. A lot more teams are going to kind of be in the mix. And ultimately, as we might see this year, we might see 2 10-6 teams in the wild card, just because a lot of those wins are just guaranteed wins against the Bengals and the Jets and things like that. So it's going to be interesting. But, one thing is, it's still the NFL. If you say the better team should win this game, then it would be very, very cut and dry. But, I mean, the Buccaneers could easily win.
Yeah.
There's teams that you say
they've done that this year.
The Texans should win this game. Oh, the Colts should beat the Jags last week of the season. Doesn't mean they will. They should beat the Buccaneers in a couple weeks. Doesn't mean they will.
Right.
Teams that shouldn't win on paper win plenty of times. So there's going to be some mix-up. I don't really see teams waltzing into 4 straight like the Texans in the season, even though they're the better team. Other than teams that are playing some of those bottom teams, like the Browns having the Bengals twice and the Dolphins once. Like, that's more or less 3 guaranteed wins.
Yep.
It should be, at least. Those games are, you can say, okay, those games, okay, those are wins. But some of these other teams that aren't very good, the Titans are decent. The Buccaneers are decent. The Jags are still decent.
Yep.
Unless they're the bottom end terrible teams, it's still going to be a tough game when it's in the NFL. So there's going to be teams that should win that don't, and that's really going to shape up, and that's where it kind of leaves the door open for teams like the Browns to play all these trash teams towards the end and give themselves a shot.
The Browns schedule. So we think the Titans and Steelers are pretty much out based on
probably.
But like you said, they're no slouch, but they're probably out. When you talk about the Browns, their schedule is so favorable to finish strong. When you look at the Raiders, now they have to play the Jets, which will probably be a win, should be a win, but their schedule is against teams that may not have the best records, but they have some tough ones. So they play the Jets, then they travel to the Chiefs, then they got the Titans, Jaguars, and Chargers, and then close the Broncos. But it's not like the Chargers are an easy victory. It's not like the Jaguars are an easy victory, and the Titans are still 500. They're not going to make the playoffs, but at the same time, they haven't been an easy out week to week. So I don't know. It really is going to shape up to be a wild finish, I think, in the AFC.
Right. Every team is tough in the NFL unless it's the Bengals and the Dolphins.
And luckily the Browns have 3 games versus those 2 opponents.
And then maybe the Redskins and maybe the Jets, even though they have 3 wins, but we could probably lump the Jets in there. But the Jags, like you mentioned, the Jags, 4-6, they're no slouch. They're a solid team. They got Foles back. Minshew held the fort down. They're a decent team. They got talent on the team. Same thing with Titans, 5-5. They've been struggling. The Chargers, 4-7, still have a lot of talent. Still got Phil Rivers. Still got Keenan Allen. Still got Bosa. I mean, they got talent all over the field.
They have a lot of good players, man.
I mean, they got a squad. Even though they're not that good this year and really going to probably make the playoffs. I mean, not probably. They're not going to make the playoffs. They're still a quality NFL team. So unless you're playing, like I said, unless you're playing the Bengals twice and the Dolphins once, which the Browns luckily get, it's not like any given week is going to be cake. And teams that should win don't all the time in the NFL. I mean, fuck, the Falcons just beat the Saints, so
it's crazy.
It happens.
Yeah.
So play a decent team. Shit's going to happen. You're not going to win every single game. And that's why all these things are saying, oh, the Texans could win 4 straight. They're not going to. Most likely, they're not going to. So that's why, like you said, it's going to be a wild finish for the AFC. And I presume same with the NFC as we kind of get into it and break it down there as well. So let's move on to the NFC. What is the playoff picture looking like? Break it down for us.
So number 1 seed, which is another surprise, maybe even more so than the Raiders, the 49ers are holding down the first seed as of today at a 9-1 record. I don't know that they'll hold that, but the 49ers are really well-coached team, and they have a lot of good players. That defense is just fucking legit, man. Number 2 is a team we have both been high on for the entire season, the Green Bay Packers. So the 49ers and Green Bay Packers get the byes, 2 classic NFL teams. Then moving on to the wild card rounds, the Saints have the 3rd seed, another team I personally am really high on. I know you like them as well. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl out of the NFC in our first episode. Their 3rd seed, 4th seed is the boys at 6-4. 5th seed is the Seahawks at 8-2. Obviously, better record than the boys, but they're behind the 49ers. And then similarly, the Vikings are 8-3. Again, better than the boys' record, but they're behind the division leader, Green Bay Packers, right now. So the NFC is a little more top-heavy, I would say, than the AFC. I mean, you got 4 teams there with actually 5 teams with 8 or more wins. I mean, that's pretty damn impressive. And then the Cowboys sitting there at 6-4 are pretty damn good, man. They have a lot of good players. Dak Prescott has really been playing good football lately. So the NFC is pretty damn good. Then looking on the outside to round out the top 10 there, like I did with the AFC. The Rams are sitting at 6-4. They've certainly had their issues this year, although they still have a lot of talent. They're the 7th seed. Sitting at 8-500 are the Philadelphia Eagles. Then the Panthers are 5-5. They're not going anywhere. They're not going to flirt with the playoffs. And neither are the 10th seed, the Chicago Bears. They are so fucked. They're in the bottom 3 in cap space. They have a trash quarterback. They traded a bunch of picks for Khalil Mack. That franchise is going to be in limbo, I think, for a while. So really,
game on the line, and you bench your supposedly supposed to be franchise QB.
It's not a good
scene.
Not a good situation in Chicago. Not good.
Wild scene in Chicago.
So really, it comes down to those top 8 teams I listed. The Eagles could fight with the Cowboys for sure. That'll be a really interesting race there for the final playoff spot. But yeah, like I said, those 5 teams that have 8 or more wins are all like, they weren't just, fluky in getting to those records either. Like, they are all legitimate teams that can contend to get to the Super Bowl, actually. So what are your thoughts on the NFC outlook and those stacked-ass teams?
Okay, multiple thoughts. So you mentioned a couple divisions. So the 49ers versus the Seahawks race, to say, is going to be very, very, very intriguing. So the 49ers have a stout schedule upcoming. And, as we're talking about this, let me pull up the Seahawks as well. And as I'm pulling that up, so the 49ers still face the Packers this upcoming week, then the Ravens, the 24th. Yeah, that is the upcoming week. That Packers, then the Ravens, Saints, Falcons should be an easy win, Rams, who's a tough team, and then the Seahawks.
I got it pulled up too. Oh my God.
Crazy end of the schedule. I mean, obviously a top-heavy easier schedule earlier in the year, facing the Bengals and the Buccaneers and the Browns, if you want to lump them in their early struggles. The Steelers, who they turned the ball over like 4 or 5 times in the first quarter, first half, and still beat by 4 points. The Redskins was early on their schedule. They just beat the Cardinals. They obviously they beat the Cardinals twice actually in the last 3 weeks. So, they had a top-heavy, easy schedule, and now it's kind of coming back to reality, I think, is what we're going to see. Luckily for them, and kind of what we've mentioned in the podcast in the past, like, it's great to have teams that you can just beat early in the season and you're kind of establishing yourself, and then be able to go after the tougher teams later. Reverse of, like we've said, like the Browns and some of the other teams that have easier schedules. But that schedule is going to be brutal for the 49ers, who their offense really hasn't done anything all season. But their defense, they've run the ball well, but their defense has really been the standout for them all season long. And, flipping over the Seahawks, they got Eagles, Vikings, Rams, Panthers, Cardinals, and end, like I mentioned, with the 49ers. So that's going to come down to the end of the wire. I think Russ Wilson is going to win the MVP, and ultimately that final game of the season against 49ers at Seahawks, I think is going to be all the marbles of that division, and it's going to be super exciting. Both teams get into the playoffs regardless. I don't think there's really much to present otherwise, I guess. I think that's going to be pretty straightforward. In the other division, being Cowboys versus Eagles, obviously the Giants and the Skins in the East there are trash, but Cowboys-Eagles is shaping up to be a tight race. You mentioned Dak Prescott. He has really proven, I've trashed him for sure earlier in the year, and, he's talking about the $40 million contracts and all this kind of nonsense. I still don't think he's one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league probably, but he's shown enough to hold the fort down, I guess, while Zeke and the guys there kind of project the team to win some games. But he's played well enough to win. He beat the Lions, I would say, and we didn't really see much of Zeke, but they won because Dak Prescott balled. Vikings, end of the game, Dak balls the fuck out. They decide on fourth down to give it to Zeke. He gets stuffed. They lose. Everybody's bitching about why they didn't get the ball put the ball in Dak's hands, who balled out all game. Put the game on the line, but we'll see what kind of, if he's able to continue that. When we look at schedules, Cowboys got Patriots, then Bills, Bears, Rams, Eagles, Redskins, whereas the Eagles have something here. Let me pull it up.
Seahawks, Dolphins, Giants, Skins, Boys, Giants. So the Eagles kind of sounds like an easier path.
Yeah.
Obviously the Seahawks, difficult game. But
right. But
Dolphins, cake. Giants, cake.
Right.
Redskins, cake. Cowboys, very difficult battle. That could decide the division
correct.
Right there.
And the Cowboys have a lead in that division by one game right now. So the Eagles are playing catch up. If the Eagles lose that game to the Boys, I think it's more or less a wrap. But if they win, it could really shape up to see really what happens, the rest of the season. The Cowboys did win. I don't know how the whole we'd really have to look into the whole tiebreaker situation, because the Cowboys did beat the Eagles earlier this season, so they would each be 1-1 head-to-head. If the Eagles won that game, we'd have to really go through the math and see what their conference record and division record and all that kind of stuff. But that's another division that's going to shape up to be really interesting. And to be honest, whoever loses that division is probably going to miss the playoffs, because when you look at the North, like you mentioned real quick on the South, I think the Saints are going to cruise for the rest of the way out. The Panthers are still hanging in there with Kyle Allen. But
he's played like shit recently.
Yeah, ultimately, I think they're going to, reality is going to catch up with them a little bit. But when you look at the North with the Packers and the Vikings, it's going to be pretty. I do think that the Packers are going to get a first-round bye, and they might get the number one seed. I would be surprised if they didn't, to be honest, just because of the 49ers schedule and the Seahawks facing the 49ers in that division. It's going to be tough, I think, for them to hold off the Packers. And, I guess a big game and a big deciding moment for that number one seed will be this upcoming week, Packers-Niners, obviously. But the Packers facing the Giants, Redskins, Bears, and then the Lions to end the season with the Vikings in between. So if the 49ers lose this week to the Packers, the Packers are tying up that first round bye as the number 1 seed with, like I said, Giants, Redskins, Bears back to back to back after that Niners game. So this upcoming week is huge for the Niners, but ultimately I do think that the Packers are going to get it done. Aaron Rodgers is just too much. He's got that veteran presence. They finally got a defense that we've talked about all year. They're just, we talked about power rankings a couple weeks ago. They were your number 1 team, and that's warranted, to say the least. It's warranted. If you talk about the Patriots with 1 loss, and you talk about, obviously, the 49ers with 1 loss, you could easily make an argument that the Packers are the best team in the NFL, and I think they're going to prove that with the number 1 seed in the NFC, North, pardon me. So when you look at the Vikings, they got Broncos, Seahawks, Lions, Chargers, Packers, Bears. So they have another easy schedule. So like I said, when you look at the loser between the Cowboys and the Eagles, they might be shit out of luck because the Vikings got their shit going on. Kirk Cousins has turned his season around. Wild fucking game last weekend against the Broncos, going down huge early and just coming back all the way. I think it was 20-0, 23-0, something like that.
I think it was one of the biggest comebacks in NFL regular season.
Yeah, 20-0 at halftime. And I can't remember, I was watching other games, but I can't remember if they scored their touchdown before the Broncos kicked their field goal in the third quarter or not, but at very least they're down 20-0 going in at halftime, and they turn it all the way around. Kirk Cousins has, like I said, got his shit all the way back. He was 29 for 35 with 319 and 3 tuds last week. They still got Dalvin Cook, who's one of the best backs in the league, and Stephon Diggs has got it going on, 121 yards and a touchdown last week, and he's just been dominant. Well, ever since they started airing the ball out early in the season, we saw him running the rock like none other. And all of a sudden, recently, they've kind of switched their tune over the last few weeks and let Kirk Cousins kind of take the reins a little bit. And it's paid off because they look like a legitimate playoff Super Bowl contending team. All of a sudden, I did not see this coming, to be honest. And, I think even though I do think they're going to lose the North there, I do think they still make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think, like I said, the NFC is top heavy, and I think it's pretty locked in. These divisions are insane. Yet the Packers and Vikings, we both agree, are both going to make the playoffs. They're locked in. The Niners and Seahawks, definitely think they're both locked in.
Yeah, it would take an ultimate collapse by the Niners. Yes, we know we talked about their tough schedule.
They're already to 9 wins.
Ultimate collapse to miss the playoffs.
Yeah,
at this point.
They're already to 9 wins. They have so much room for error to still get in. So I think those two are locked in. So you already got
basically both wild
4
cards
teams.
locked in.
4 teams from 2 divisions locked in. I mean, that makes the room for error very thin. The Saints are going to win that division. They're winning that division.
Right. They got a 3-game lead already. They're going to win it. Like another situation would take an ultimate collapse, which is very, very impressive by the Saints. Like you said, your Super Bowl pick. I can't remember if I had them in the Super Bowl. I can't remember. I think I might have had them in the Super Bowl as well. I can't remember. But anyways, they lose Drew Brees, franchise QB, one of the best QBs of all time, Hall of Famer. Come in with Teddy Bridgewater, who does nothing but all that he needs to, and all of a sudden their defense just balls the fuck out without Drew Brees. Like, they are a full, complete, well-rounded team that is going to be scary come playoff time, especially once Drew Brees gets back in his groove. Look out for the Saints. Once Drew Brees went down, I know on the podcast had some comments doubting whether the Saints are going to be able to recover and all that stuff, and you were steadfast that they were going to continue to do their thing, and Drew was going to come back in time with a decent record, and that's been 100% true. The Saints, truth, bro.
They got a lot of good players on both sides of the ball, man.
It's because they got all of them Buckeyes on both sides of the ball.
They do have a lot
Mike
of
Thomas
Buckeyes. It's disgusting.
The best receiver in the league, so
yeah, he is. No argument.
Let alone all the defensive
Browns
players
they have. Instead, we drafted a fucking midget at 15th.
Lattimore and Bell.
Anywho, moving on from my saltiness, and I know you share the same thing. We should have Mike Thomas. So yeah, I mean that leaves I think we have 5 spots locked in, like you already hit on. It comes
Whoever
down.
wants to fuck around and win the East.
Yeah, I mean, and they're gonna they're going to get that home playoff game in the wild card round just because they're winning the division, even though I think they'll have a worse record than the team they're playing unless the 49ers really shit the bed here, like you
Saints,
said.
Vikings, first round of the playoffs.
That'd be sweet.
Rematch city,
dude,
bro.
That rematch.
Oh, yes.
Well,
like
from
to see that.
a couple of years ago now. But
yeah
that'd be
kind of shaping up to be looking like that because, like I said, Packers get that number 1 seed. They would face the well, I guess they would get a bye.
The only thing would be is if the Saints play themselves into a first round bye. If the Niners drop a few games and the Saints continue winning, but the Rams are sitting there at 6-4. But man, they're in the same division as the Seahawks and 49ers, and we're both locking them in. And that 5th spot, we're locking both wild card spots in,
which is probably going to be like, it was funny. Like I think both wild cards very realistically could both have 10 wins. All 4 wild card teams could be 10-6.
Wouldn't that be crazy?
It would be wild.
That would have to be like a first, I feel like.
Like I said, I think a lot of it comes down to the number of terrible teams. Like, I guess maybe I'll, in between this week and next, and maybe I can give an update if I get time to really break this down and look into like how often were as many shitty teams as right now. Like, maybe I'm just overreacting because there's like the Bengals are so bad and they probably lose every game. The Redskins are so bad they're going to win 1 game. Like, but it seems to me that there's so many extraordinarily shitty teams that it's giving free wins to teams that otherwise, we talked about it. Sometimes you play a 4-6 team that ends up being 5-11. They won 5 games, like decent team. But when you have the the Bengals, who are probably going to win 0 games, and the Redskins, I don't see them winning another game the rest of the season either. So, I mean, we have some extraordinarily shitty teams. And is that keeping teams alive? And is it giving teams 10 wins that ultimately otherwise wouldn't have? I don't know. It'll be interesting. And I wonder if there's ever been a time where there's been 10 teams for every team in the playoffs. There can't be. There can't. Well, I mean, actually, the East might not have 10-win team. That's going to be interesting, the NFC East. But with both wild cards with 10 wins on both sides, that's a very realistic chance that happens.
No, these final 5 to 6 games, depending on which teams have had a bye and which haven't, are it's gonna be fun to watch, man. The NFL just continues to be an awesome product to follow up until the very end. The playoff push is always exciting, and it's really shaped up to this year to know who the true 8 teams from each conference really have the best shot at finishing. So.
All right, so before we move on to NCAA and the college football playoff ranks and all that kind of stuff, I don't think you gave your full playoff prediction at this juncture in time following Week 11 on November 19th. What is it shaping up for you, both sides? What's our playoff picture on your mind?
Both sides considered. I think AFC, 5 of the 6 teams in the playoffs as things stand today are legit. Patriots, Ravens, Texans, Chiefs, and Colts are all making it in to the playoffs, in my opinion.
Texans in, okay.
That last spot is what's going to be up for grabs between the Bills, Raiders, and Browns. And I'm going to go with the Raiders finishing strong and squeaking in there. But I'm not confident about that at all.
Yeah.
I'm confident on the other 5 teams with the
Texans
being interesting, man. But
they were a team that I had left out, if memory serves, over the last 12 minutes or whatever it was that we've talked about this. But yeah, all right. So
that's the thing. They have 2 tough games, but after that, it's smooth sailing.
True.
I think it comes down to that 6th spot between the Raiders, Bills, and Browns.
Yeah, and it also comes, I think, let's say the Texans, win those 2 games, those last 4, they don't win all of them, but they lose 1. Now they're 9-7. I don't know what the tiebreaker situation is going to be with some of these other teams. That's something we'd have to look into, maybe when it gets closer in a couple of weeks, worth more of our investment in time and figuring out who does what with the tiebreaks and all that kind of stuff. But
it still could be.
Raiders,
the Bills
Texans,
stay in.
Raiders, Texans, Browns, all with 9 wins. What happens? Like, I don't know. I'd have to look at it.
That would be crazy.
But
it could happen. That's the thing. That last spot is really what's up for grabs.
So
But
So yeah,
that's
that's
what
your
I'll project
AFC. What
for
do you got?
AFC.
What do you got for the NFC?
I'm sticking with, again, about 5 teams here: 49ers, Packers, Vikings, Saints, and Seahawks. All make it in.
Who wins the West?
Who wins the West? I think the Seahawks are going to end up winning the West.
The 49ers are going to – basically, I think the 49ers are going to lose their last game against the Seahawks, and that's going to ultimately cost them because I think the Seahawks are going to go on a little run. I mean, not that they've not
Wilson
been on
is
a
a
run
beast, man.
Yeah.
He's insane.
But
I'm going to take that elite quarterback every time.
So, yeah, like I mentioned, final game of the season. So I think it's all going to come down to that. I think the Niners are ultimately going to lose this week, and they're going to have all the marbles on the line final week of the season. And the Seahawks did win that first matchup last week, or whenever that was. Yeah, last week.
Yeah, I think ultimately the Saints and the Packers end up with the byes. So, yeah, I got the Seahawks winning the West, but 49ers still making it in. Packers, Saints making it in. Vikings definitely making it in. And then that last spot up for grabs out of the East, obviously, because I already picked 2 wild cards. And I do think it's going to be the Cowboys. So basically the top 6 right now, as things stand today.
Hold down the fort.
The fort, in my opinion. I just think the Cowboys are too good. I don't think they're going to give up that spot in the division. And the Eagles still have to play the Seahawks and the Cowboys again. They have some easy games in between them. But I think ultimately the boys pull it out with how Dak Prescott is playing, and Amari Cooper is a stud.
Beast.
And I don't think we've really seen Zeke his full self this year. And if he hits his full potential that we know he can play at, that's only going to improve things for the boys down the stretch. But they have a much difficult schedule than the Eagles. They just have a game up on them right now. So It won't be an easy road per se.
Yeah. I think, again, like I mentioned, how the 49ers and Seahawks going to kind of going to come down to that final game of the season for all the marbles in the division. Same probably going to be true with the boys and the Eagles, that second to last game of the season. Again, if the Eagles win, I don't know what the whole tiebreaker situation will be since they'll both be 1-1. But I've been high on the Cowboys all season. They have a game up in the division, and I do think they ultimately do hold the Eagles off enough with the talent that they have. Mike Gallup is another guy who's kind of broken out as a beast on that offensive side of the ball. Zeke is, in my opinion, the best running back in the league. Dak has shown that he's good enough, making me eat my words a little bit. He's really shown that he's good enough to kind of make a push a little bit and I even think even earlier in the year I said with the rest of the talent they have, Dak could be mediocre Dak and they could really make a serious push. I'm not going to back away from that, even though they've lost some games that they probably should have won. But I do have a lot of faith still in the boys, and I think they're going to hold down the East. And all the other teams that you mentioned, I mean, it's pretty more or less cut and dry. I don't have any really faith in the Rams are going to do something miraculous at this point. The Saints are going to run away with that division as they already have with a 3-game lead. And I also agree that the Seahawks, I think, are going to pull ahead of the Niners, and it's going to come down to that final week of the season and that overtime win that they had, like I said, last week, whatever it is, 9 days ago or whatever. I think that's going to be the turning moment for that division. You know, they got it done last second of the game. 49ers had a shot. They didn't win it. Seahawks came back. Russ Wilson, the whole shit, won that game. And that's going to put them over the top when it's all said and done. And after, I think, again, I don't know the whole situation with the tiebreakers. As I mentioned, if the Seahawks could even lose to the Niners at the last week of the season and still win that division, depending on the tiebreaker situation. I'm not sure. But ultimately, I agree. I see the Seahawks winning the West, and I pretty much agree with all your top 6 in that whole side of the ball, or the whole side of that conference. So,
I think the tiebreaker goes something like, for the division specifically, it
head
goes
to head, then like division,
it goes
and
head to head,
conference,
then division,
like
then common opponents.
Oh yeah,
I
okay.
believe that's why they go, hey, AFC North. You're playing the NFC West this year.
Right.
They try to make it give them common opponents to judge from. But I think we're on the same page with the majority of top teams.
Yeah, the NFC is a little bit more cut and dry, I think, because a lot of teams are just at this point too far away. But the AFC, they still have a lot of spots up for grabs if teams want to make a little bit of a run. And the teams that are a little bit ahead and in it still, like the Steelers and the Titans, I just don't see them having enough firepower and enough talent and enough easy schedule on their side to really put themselves in that conversation. But I think the AFC is much more up for grabs in that end of the wild card spots than the NFC for sure. So, yeah.
Even the first round bye is up for grabs.
For sure.
Because the Ravens could fall off a little bit with some of their games. They still have
most
to play,
definitely. I mean, they're reliant on Lamar Jackson, who is using his legs more than any quarterback we've seen in the history of the NFL. We saw the Browns slow him down. I've been saying it all year. You know, if you slow down Lamar's legs, you probably win the game. I've also said much easier said than done, right? Because he is a freak athlete.
And their defense, I think you brought this up earlier, maybe on the Browns podcast, and it's kind of going around on Twitter and scholarly articles from the football standpoint that their defense has really improved since the first 4 weeks. They're actually playing pretty legit. They traded for Peters, obviously. That was a boost to their secondary. They're just playing well-rounded football on both sides right now.
And it also comes down to the fact that they have one of the best coaches in the NFL in John Harbaugh.
He's so consistent.
I mean, he's been in the league for forever. He went to a Super Bowl, won a Super Bowl, the whole shit. He's one of the best coaches in the league, and he's showing it why. I mean, he's doing more with less. I mean, not that they have not a lot of talent. They do, certainly, but he's doing more with less so far as being able to throw the rock. Everyone wants to talk about Lamar Jackson being an MVP candidate. Of course he is. Might win it. He's athletic as fuck, but he's not making Tom Brady throws or maybe not Tom Brady this year, but Aaron Rodgers throws, Pat Mahomes throws. He's just getting enough done. He's finding ways to win, and he's finding ways to
makes impactful plays.
Right, and look at the defense. John Harbaugh's made improvements to the defensive side of the ball where they struggled early, and now they're fucking balling out. So one of the best coaches in the league. Pair that with the talent that they have.
Plus, I'll give a shout out to Greg Roman, their OC, who has it going on with that offense.
But like I said, it could easily be exploitable if you get your shit right on the right day, and that we'll see kind of how the rest of the season shapes up now that they face a little bit more difficult competition. We talk about the Browns a lot and how their schedule kind of flips from their difficult schedule to their easier schedule. The Ravens is basically the reverse. They had basically the Browns' second half of the schedule they had at the beginning, and now what the Browns had at the beginning of their schedule, now the Ravens are catching up. Some of those, like you said, those opponents, they're now catching up and getting those on the back end. So we'll kind of see how it shapes up so far as them playing those difficult opponents, and if Lamar can keep doing Lamar things. He's a freak, but I'm still out on Lamar. Fuck Lamar. I'm very salty. We'll see.
It's got to be between him
my words.
And Russ Wilson for the MVP.
But we still have several weeks left, and we'll see how the rest of the season shapes up. It's going to be exciting. As you mentioned, domination of headlines continues in the NFL. So I'm excited for the next few weeks. It's going to be extremely exciting, especially since the Browns hopefully will continue to stay in it, knock on wood. And regardless, it's going to be exciting end of the NFL season. So with that being said, let's move along to some NCAA college football playoffs.
So moving on to college football, obviously football dominates the headlines, especially when we near the end here for both playoff pushes in both leagues. Playoff rankings were released tonight. Not much has changed. You still got LSU at the top, followed by Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia rounding out the top four right now. Georgia just had another impressive win to their resume. I know they have that shitty loss, but I look for quality wins to outweigh bad losses. And the fact is they beat Florida, Notre Dame, both can be 9 to 10 win teams, and they just took care of Auburn. So they sit at 9-1 at number 4. Then you got Bama at 5, Oregon at 6, Utah at 7. Oregon and Utah are on a one-way road to playing each other in the Pac-12 title game. And then Penn State is at 8, Oklahoma at 9, Minnesota at 10. Minnesota coming off of a loss to Iowa. Tough break for them after coming off a win to Penn State. And then obviously Oklahoma versus Baylor was the game of the week. Baylor, been high on Matt Rule for a while for that next, up-and-coming coaching candidate. Comes out and smacks Baylor in the mouth. Baylor comes out and smacks Oklahoma in the mouth. And sure enough, in that second half, can't write off a team like Oklahoma. They come roaring back, bro.
Wild.
And finish with a victory.
Yes, wild game. I did catch the beginning of that. Dude, Baylor was on one, bro. What was the final score of that game? Did I win money on that?
34-31.
Okay, yeah. I took Baylor plus 10.5 or something like that. And I'm like watching this game. Oh, this is easy money.
Yeah, they
easy
were
money.
plus 10.5.
Easy money. I'm winning, right? So it was pretty wild. So my buddy and I were out at the bar watching the end of the Ohio State game, eat some wings, the whole shit. I'm like, all right, let's go play some pool. We run to the pool joint across the road a little bit. And whole pool hall area is fucking rented out by a private party. So I'm like, what the fuck? Like, there's like 5 pool tables in there.
That sucks.
5 pool tables in there. Nobody even playing pool, but there's one table being played. The other 4 are just wide open. And there's probably, 20 people left in this little room where all the pool areas. So I walk up there. I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? Private party. Girl comes over. She's like, oh, how may I help you? I was like, I'm trying to play some pool. She's like, oh, there's a private party. I was like, who's the guy who rented it out? Or she's like, oh, it's that guy. I was like, oh, can I go ask him if I can play pool? And she said no. So she said that would be rude. She said that would be rude. I was like, oh, so I'm not allowed? She said no. I'm like, oh, fuck. So I had to leave. So I'm like, all right, fuck it. Chris, let's roll to this other place I know's got a pool table. So we hop in the car, roll to the other spot. Fucking private party there, too.
Get the fuck
2
out
pool tables there. Can't play pool there either. And they're not even playing pool. There's fucking two bitches sitting on the pool table. I'm like, what the fuck is this? So we drink a couple beers there. So we're catching a little bit of the game. So we're like, all right, fuck it. Let's roll back home, catch an Uber. Let me call, see if the first place, that maybe the party's gone. We called ahead. They were gone. Pool tables were back open. So we had to run home, catch an Uber because we were getting drunk at this point. Fucking back to the other bar with the pool hall with fucking 5 tables. Finally got able to play some pool. And at this point, the game was basically over. So we missed all the cool action of Oklahoma coming back. But it's all the beginning. Baylor was fucking them up. And somehow they pulled Atlanta Falcons in the Super Bowl versus Patriots 28-3 situation.
That score, man.
Against Oklahoma. Like I said, I don't know exactly what happened. I didn't even really watch the highlights, but maybe Oklahoma is that legit. Maybe Jalen Hurts is that legit. Going into the game, I thought, okay, I'm going to take Baylor because their defense, in my opinion, has proven to be serious.
Best in the Big 12.
They've proven to be serious, and their offense is a Big 12 offense, also legit. And Oklahoma's defense, atrocious up to this part of the season. Terrible. Proved to be true in the first half. I was watching this. I'm like, hey, here you go. This is exactly what we predicted. And then all of a sudden, shit changed. I wasn't, like I said, I missed all of it. I don't know if you caught it, but I don't know what the fuck happened. But it flipped on its head.
What happened is closing out a game versus a program like Oklahoma and a program like Ohio State and Alabama, who have been consistent powers for the past decade, is no easy task.
Right. Actually, where that's mentioned, another game that I won money off a couple weeks ago, I can't remember exactly when it was. It might have been a halftime or a little bit after. Alabama at the live odds was -17 against LSU at one point.
Wow.
I hammered that, and they almost came back and won the game. So like you mentioned, it's hard to put away those great teams.
It's not easy, man. I mean, so Baylor, Matt Rule got them motivated, ready to come out and play their fucking asses off, and they did. But second half, got a little bit conservative on the offensive side, kind of relying on that defense. And guess what? You're still going up against that big-time program who has Lincoln Riley, one of the better, if not the best offensive minds in all of the sport. You got Jalen Hurts, who, dude, he started tucking the ball and just making plays with his legs. Broken play, Dude's
He
taking
said,
off.
"Fuck you, Joe Boo. I do it myself."
Yeah, exactly. So, when you have studs like that where, it's not even Lincoln Riley by design. It's, hey, Mr. Stud quarterback, you tuck this fucking ball and you run it. And that's what Jalen Hurts did. He also slung it around a little bit and ended up finishing with a pretty damn good game statistically and came back and won. Baylor couldn't make the plays at the end. What was really odd is the last two plays of the game to seal Baylor's fate. Oklahoma runs the same scheme on defense, drops their defensive end into coverage, or maybe their edge linebacker into coverage that usually comes after the passer. First time they did it, incomplete pass. The dude dropped an interception. Very next play, they do the same concept. That same dude actually picks it off this time. The quarterback got fooled 2 plays in a row. The first time, didn't get picked.
Like,
Second time, got picked.
They're not going to do it again, right? They can't do the same shit again.
Yeah, I don't know what he was watching.
And then they did it again. Nice. Yeah, I mean, the question also, ultimately becomes what happens to Oklahoma in the college football playoff rankings?
They're probably going to rematch Baylor in the Big 12 title.
Let's assume, I don't know. SEC is going to be interesting. SEC is going to be interesting. If Georgia beats LSU, I mentioned a couple ways. I don't see LSU getting left out, to be honest. But maybe they do. Maybe this brings Oklahoma back into the conversation as a legit contender of if they went out and beat Baylor again, will they be able to jump a one-loss LSU? Will they be able to jump a one-loss Alabama? Will they be able to jump a potential one-loss Oregon, for instance, or Pac-12 championship? But I'm still in the camp of assuming it's going to be Oregon. That's been my pick for the Pac all season long. So where do you kind of see shaping out? Let's just assume Ohio State runs it, because if they lose, all hell breaks loose.
That would be chaos.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Right. If they lose, all hell breaks loose. Putting a one-loss Ohio State in there with everything LSU loses in the SEC championship would be another game that all hell will more or less break loose. But let's just assume, aside LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, because there's really no predicting, I think, what could happen if one of those 3 teams lose. I guess if Clemson loses, they're fucked. They're out. They're done. But
they're not going to lose, though.
Yeah, they're not going to lose. Depending on how the whole situation shapes up with LSU and Ohio State, whether it's, let's say Ohio State loses to Michigan in the final game of the year, or Penn State this upcoming weekend, or in the Big Ten championship, probably going to be rematch against Wisconsin, I would imagine, or maybe Minnesota.
Possibly. They have to play each other still, so that should sort itself out.
So depending, let's say they lose a Big Ten championship, that will obviously make a different story and make it more interesting. If Ohio State loses to Penn State but then wins the Big Ten, or Clemson or LSU loses a game and then wins the SEC, or they lose the SEC, whole lot of shit can kind of break down, and really, it's hard to predict if LSU or Ohio State has one loss, what would happen, because there's a lot of circumstances that would have to happen to really be able to shape it out, whether it's regular season or whether they win their conference or they lose in the conference championship and that's their one loss. So many things would really shape up that it's too hard to predict. So those aside, let's assume they just went out. Yep. Because I think the real question is, what happens with the 4 seed so in this scenario, Georgia would have to lose again, because if LSU loses to Georgia in the SEC championship, like I said, shit's going to hit the fan, and it's going to be chaos, and there's going to be debates to be had for fucking days. But so in this scenario, UGA loses, then you got a one-loss Alabama still, assuming they beat Auburn. You got a Big 10 or a Big 12 champ in, let's say, Oklahoma. I would be hard-pressed to see Baylor beating Oklahoma and getting in at this point, to be honest.
Tough to beat a team twice, though.
Yeah. Well, let's just throw Baylor in. One-loss Baylor, one-loss Oklahoma, one-loss Alabama, and a one-loss Pac-12 championship.
Oklahoma and Baylor can't have one loss, though.
No, they both couldn't at the same time, but I'm saying, with the argument's sake, if it's a one-loss Baylor if it's a one-loss Oklahoma, one of the two presumably is going to have one loss with a Pac-12 or Big 12 championship in their pocket. So one of them two, if they have one loss with the Big 12 championship. One of the two between Utah and Oregon. I think Utah's going to be on the back end of that. Oregon, I think, has a lot more legitimate of a chance, in my opinion, if they win out at this point, especially since their first loss, or the only loss was the first game of the season, last play of the game against Auburn. So let's just assume it's Oregon. So you got Oregon, Big 12 champ, one of those two with one loss in that conference, and then Alabama without a conference and one loss. Like, what happens with number 4 seed?
I think it's asinine to leave out a one-loss definitive conference champion in this case, because like 2014, Ohio State made it in after annihilating Wisconsin, but the Big 12 didn't have a championship game.
So you're saying Alabama is all the way out at this point? I also agree, because without Tua, who got injured last week, and his career is going to be in jeopardy. It sounds like it's going to be tough for him to recover, but he's young. He'll be fine probably. So let's say I would see Alabama getting in extremely difficult at this point. The fact that they lost Tua. If they had Tua, much more different argument. I think that's going to come into factor when college football playoff rankers are deciding.
And I think it should be a factor. They're not as good on paper. Like,
I agree. They're probably
Ohio State had a chance to prove themselves that year, I think, without their quarterback, and they went out and fucking smacked Wisconsin, and showed they still had a legit team. Alabama's not going to the SEC championship game unless LSU has a freaking huge collapse, which is just not going to happen. So, I just, especially without
Alabama
Tua,
I agree, honestly, because of the Tua situation.
I mean, but even if they had Tua, like, I get the whole, I want to see the best 4 teams in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, their schedule has been weak, and I think you need to reward teams for their schedule played. And that's not to say, like, even Oklahoma or Oregon or Utah have played tougher schedules, but guess what? They played that extra game. They had to play that 13th game, and if they win, like Oregon or Utah will have beaten the other, that's a big win. Like, how can you leave them out?
That's an extra win in the column right there.
Yeah, how can you leave them out?
I agree with the Alabama situation. Regardless, they should be fucked. But I think if they had Tua and they continue to just dominate these trash teams like Western Carolina in the last week of the season before Auburn, which we already got into that. It's atrocious. The whole SEC is playing fucking cake squad the second to last week of the season.
Yeah.
Argument we had or a discussion we had last week. But I think if they had Tua and they just won out in handed fashion, they shouldn't be in the conversation, but I think they would be. And I'm almost glad that they're almost fucked at this point, because they don't deserve to be in without a conference championship, especially like you said, when there's probably going to be 2 one-loss conference Big 5, Power 5 champs in the discussion. That one-loss non-champ should be out.
And that's why this year more than ever, and I'm even going to use Alabama still for this case, it should be expanded to at least 6 teams, but most likely 8 is that sweet spot, because even Alabama, you could argue that Ohio State is the only other team that you could say has equal or more on paper talent. You compare those 2 teams to the rest of the country, like, they're both so stacked, and Alabama is going to send so many players to the NFL.
You don't think LSU's in that conversation?
They are in that conversation. They are.
I think definitely in that.
But I mean, when you're
Alabama, I think those 3 are. When you're Alabama,
on paper. They literally sign like the number 1 class.
Yeah.
They for 5 years straight. I think Georgia broke it either last year. So like that LSU Bama game could have been different if Tua was 100%. He wasn't 100% for that game.
No, definitely not.
If he was 100%, I mean, you said it yourself. They made it even interesting toward the end. You never know.
Tua, yeah.
So my point is, like, Alabama is still a really fucking good team. It'd be fun to see them compete at the end. But since there's only 4, you can't leave a one-loss conference champ out.
They're going to probably have to. Like I said, there's 5 Power 5s.
Well, no. They'll have to because of that. But
right.
I'm saying Alabama compared to a one-loss Oklahoma and a one-loss Oregon or Utah. Like, I'm sorry, man.
So where do you think it shapes out between, let's say, an Oregon and Oklahoma? I think Ohio State at this point, if they lose, they're pretty much doomed. Just because they need these big wins against Penn State and Wisconsin, or Penn State and Michigan, and then if they lose the Big Ten championship, well, then they don't have a conference championship. We're at the same conversation as Alabama, basically. Right. So I think they basically have to win out to get in. LSU is kind of a different story. They could lose to Georgia, who's going to be, ranked in the top 4 when they play each other as another one-loss team playing LSU in the conference championship. So that would make it interesting. I think Ohio State is pretty much fucked if they lose. But for the sake of the argument, what happens between, in your opinion, Big 12 versus Pac-12? How does that kind of shape up at this moment? I think if you look at the playoff rankings, Oregon is going to be ranked ahead of both of those.
They are
teams. I don't know how far Baylor ended up dropping, but Oregon ahead of Oklahoma, going Oregon, Utah, Penn State, Oklahoma, which is pretty interesting. That might just be a ratings grab for Penn State, Ohio State this weekend, with Ohio State being an 18-point favorite at home.
Crazy
to think that a number 8 team in the nation is an 18-point underdog.
Oklahoma should be ahead of Penn State.
I agree. Like I said, that might be just a ratings grab. Regardless, somehow Minnesota stays in the top 10. But Oklahoma, a couple spots below Oregon. Let's assume Penn State loses, so now they move up a slot. Can Oklahoma realistically jump either Utah or Oregon, who are both ahead of Oklahoma right now? Could they realistically jump? Personally, I see that hard to fathom.
They can't.
If
Oregon and Utah went out up to that conference,
they remain ahead of Oklahoma, play each other. One of them is going to win against
Oklahoma
the other.
Can't jump them.
How can they jump them?
Whether you agree with the rankings as they currently stand or not, if you're ranking it this way and all things stand, like those teams all win out, and then obviously Utah and Oregon take care of one another. No.
Yeah, I think
you can't have Oklahoma jump either team.
I think this week's rankings were very telling on what the college football rankers say about that whole situation between the Pac and the Big 12s. The fact that Oklahoma stayed below both of those Pac-12 teams and they stayed below Penn State, I think says a lot to what they think about Penn State and that loss to Kansas State, and what that says about Oklahoma and their loss to Kansas State. The fact that they are that far below with Penn State in the middle is wild. Honestly, I think Penn State should be below, like we said, but I don't see them being able to jump. So those two have to play each other. That's a great win for either of those two teams. Oklahoma gets to play Baylor again. Where's Baylor? Where have they dropped in these rankings? Because
14th.
They haven't really played anybody for the most part all season. Their big game, they dominated the first half and then showed that they're just not as good of a team against Oklahoma. So, they beat them twice. What really does that say about their team? Texas loses again, I believe, this past week. They have fallen all the way off. That's not a good win anymore. I mean, Oklahoma, I think, is kind of on the back end. They need a lot of help. And the fact that both Pac-12 teams are ahead of them, both with one loss, both with more or less easy schedules ahead, and they're going to face off against each other, which means one of them's guaranteed to get a great win going into the Final Four selection process. I think Oklahoma's more or less fucked at this point.
Yeah, I think they're going to be left out. And personally, I think even if Ohio State drops a game to Penn State, which I don't think they will, or Michigan, I think out of those two teams, Michigan has the better shot to pull off an upset against Ohio State. Not saying they will. Obviously, Ryan and I will have a huge preview episode heading into that game.
Yes, next week, tune in. Actually, as I pitch this, I'll probably pitch this at the end. We are planning to do a live stream situation where we will be live on YouTube for the duration of our podcast. So check that out. I'll plug it again at the end, but just wanted to put that in as we're talking about it right now. Next week, huge week.
Huge.
I'm Buckeyes, huge Homer fan. You're the same with Michigan, and we got that rivalry going. We're going to hammer it home as a special Ohio State-Michigan episode. That's all we're going to talk about all next week, and it's going to be fun. So
it's going to be awesome.
Yes, let's jump back into your point. Sorry to interrupt on that.
So even if Michigan beats Ohio State and then Ohio State goes on, they'll probably play a 10-win team in that conference championship game. I think they still would be more worthy and deserving of getting into the playoff over the Big 12 one-loss champion.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Now, Pac-12, maybe you could throw an argument, but if Ohio State, which I think will still win the Big 10, even if they do drop a game, I think you'd still point to, let's say Oregon wins. I'm sorry. OSU is the more
Right.
talented team.
Eyeball test will give Ohio State the advantage that should at least. Everybody knows who has watched any college football this year that Ohio State is, in my opinion, the best team in the country. An argument, I guess, could be made for LSU, but talent-wise, Ohio State has done nothing to make nothing to show that LSU is better than them.
Right.
With talent. That LSU just played better teams, more or less, that you could say potentially on
They've
paper.
They've been able to prove a little
right.
bit more in the deserving
But
factor.
It's kind of going to go, shape up here in the next couple of weeks with Penn State and Michigan, like we mentioned, and then that 10-win Big Ten championship game, presumably, that Ohio State will be playing in either Wisconsin or Minnesota. So, they'll have a similar resume to Oregon, both both conference champs, both same record. Eyeball test shows Ohio State is clearly the better team, but if Ohio State loses that Big Ten championship game, that's a whole other conversation.
But the Big Ten conference is, in my opinion,
still have the same amount of wins, though. That's
I think the Big Ten conference is the second best conference in the nation, second to the SEC.
Which is very, very top heavy. Much like the Big Ten in many respects.
Yeah,
but
it's top heavy, but really that's all that matters.
Yeah.
That's all I really look at.
Who gives a fuck about Arkansas versus Nebraska?
Yeah, whatever. The Big Ten's bottom half is fucking trash too.
Northwestern, hey, they might win
Rutgers.
2 games this year. Whew, Rutgers, they might win 2 games this year.
Yeah. So, I think with that said, I think the Big Ten is better than both Pac-12 and Big 12. So I feel like the one-loss conference champ out of the Big Ten deserves to be in that playoff over both of those conferences. You got to factor that in, especially Ohio State being in the Big Ten East, which is the tougher division. And if they go into that Big Ten championship and play the best team from the weaker division, like I said, most likely it's going to be Wisconsin or Minnesota, who will both play each other and need 10 wins to get to that game. That's another, 9 to 10 win range team that Ohio State will have on their resume. I think that's better than what the Pac-12 and Big 12 can produce.
So let me ask you this: how valuable is the conference championship game? Okay, so let's say, if Ohio State loses the conference championship game, beats at Michigan. Wins obviously home against Penn State. Let's go to the Big Ten championship undefeated, lose that game. They have the same record as Oregon, but they don't have that conference championship. So Oregon won one more neutral site game than Ohio State wins on the road against Michigan and loses a neutral site game against, let's say, a Minnesota or Wisconsin. What's more valuable? You know what I mean? Is the conference championship put them over the edge because it's the conference championship and they get to say that? Or what do we kind of lean towards? That's kind of another interesting conversation.
It's a really difficult question.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have my mind set.
It would be tough.
Either which way.
It would be tough, I think, for the committee to say, yes, Ohio State is better. Yes, they lost a neutral site game, but beat Michigan and lose the Big Ten championship. But it would, I think, be hard for them to. They could easily do it, to be honest, because it's Ohio State and we talk about money factor and we talk about all these different things. But to be respected, I think it would be hard for them to say this Power 5 champ with the same record doesn't get in when the other opponent that they played. You got Oregon, who lost the first game of the year to Auburn and won out. And then you got Ohio State, who loses the last game of the year in the conference championship, so they don't have a conference championship. I would be shocked if Oregon gets left out over Ohio State. Even though Ohio State on paper, even though Ohio State eyeball test is the best team, just don't fucking lose. It's basically the point for Ohio State, because if you give it into the hands of the committee, I think they will do, honestly, in my opinion, the right thing and give it to Oregon over Ohio State team.
Hardware talks.
Exactly.
Gosh, winning that to say you're the conference champion is
right. That has to mean something in college football still, and I think the committee will ensure that it does still mean something by saying, you know what, Oregon, you won. What would that be? 11 games straight, 12 games straight. You won your conference against a Utah team that was
and that'd be a good
one
win.
Level below.
That'd be a really
great
good win.
To say that they're going to leave them out of an Ohio State team who eyeball test is better but doesn't deserve it as much probably because they lost their last game of the season instead of their first game of the season. They don't have a conference championship where Oregon would have in this scenario. I think the committee would put Oregon in, and I wouldn't really be able to argue, to be honest.
Yeah, and the thing with that is, same record and whatnot, but timing the loss, I think, is important. Like people say, oh, it's better to lose early in the year than later. Well, yeah,
sure.
I want to put the teams playing their best football at the end in the playoffs over teams playing their best at the start and fizzling out toward the end. So, yeah, the games later in the season probably have more weight than early on. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, man, because it's all the more reason to go to 8 teams because there's still that incentive. Like for Ohio State to lose, if it were 8 teams, say they lose that conference championship game, guess what they did? They fucked themselves out of that home field. Now they're dropping to, that 6th or 7th seed and have to go on the road now against a difficult team now in a more hostile environment than hosting a game. Be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to really talk about these conversations or these theories or not theories, but scenarios and what could happen and projecting. But if we expanded it to 8, I think it would even be more fun and it would be even more relevant conversations, and it would make sure that the best teams wouldn't get left out of an opportunity because they slip up one game, whether it's Ohio State in the last game of the season or whatever the case may be. Oregon losing first game of the year on the road to Auburn, the last play of the game, might ultimately cost them a shot because they lost that game. Even though they have only one loss and they won their next 13 games straight or whatever it is, they deserve to get in if they went out, and they might not. And that's why we need 8 teams. But it's still fun to kind of hypothesize of what could happen and what should happen and all this kind of stuff, especially as we're kind of closing the tail end of the season. But more often than not, it all does shape itself out. The final 4 is, for the most part, consistently okay.
Yeah,
those last slots are
this seriously could
always
be the first
controversial.
Year where it's like
the
holy
most
shit, you could justify the top 7 teams making it in the final 4.
Yeah, and it might take Alabama getting left out this year alongside an Ohio State 1-loss team that loses the Big Ten championship also getting left out. Like 2 teams that are huge moneymakers in the NCAA's eyes getting left out with 1 loss, obviously deserving to get in the playoffs, but not making it because you can't leave Oregon out or whatever the case may be. Maybe that is what puts them over the top for the NCAA to say, okay, we can't allow Alabama and Ohio State, with as good as teams as they are and the talent that they have, to both miss the playoffs in the same season with the talent that they have. That might be like, okay, let's make it 8. Make sure this never happens again. I hope that doesn't happen because I hope Ohio State waltzes into the number 1 or number 2 seed, but I don't know.
Yeah, but you can expand it from Ohio State, man. I mean, LSU could lose to Georgia.
They're getting in, probably.
You could say Georgia, even Georgia with 2 losses.
The Ohio State conversation versus Oregon, I think, is a little bit different than LSU versus Oregon. I think LSU gets in over Ohio State with 1 loss if it's against George in the conference championship, all that kind of stuff.
But realistically, with some of these losses, I mean, you're still weighing in these huge, big-name schools with a bunch of NFL player, big-name type players, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, possibly Ohio State, even though I see them winning out. Oklahoma, even with 1 loss. I mean, there's an entertainment factor. They're a traditional program. They're loaded. They're fun to watch. I don't know. You got these big name schools, obviously Alabama, that could be somewhat deserving, but left out because we're only at 4 teams this year. So it's a fun year. 2 more weeks, then conference championship week. It's shaping up, man.
And we got some big games ahead of us, particularly Ohio State. Game day is going to be in Columbus this weekend, noon o'clock. Penn State, going to be a big game. Like I said, Ohio State 18-point favorites, but it's always, I feel like Penn State always plays a tough game against Ohio State. So it's going to be exciting. Ready to see Ohio State fuck them up by 3 tuds and really assert their dominance, and then we can really have some fun going into next week. Who's Michigan got this weekend?
Indiana on the road.
Yeah.
Indiana, actually, this is their best team in a
Indiana's been playing tough
long time
as of late. That might make them be a challenging game. I hope it is. I hope it's tight so Michigan can kind of fight to the end. I still think they do ultimately win, but I actually think it should be tight.
I kind of like it just because they're playing a similar offensive style to Ohio State. Like they can throw the rock. You know what I mean? Like Ohio State can
can do it all, bro.
Oh, they can do it all. it'll just be a decent test.
Chase Young
before
coming
Ohio
back
State.
this week. Don't want to forget that. Happy to have him back. Glad he got a 2-week bye. That should be nice for him to rest up a little bit. I know he's not banged up, but a little bit. Nice to have him get a little bit of rest against some cake squads like Maryland and Rutgers. So expect to see him to kind of break out again and really dominate this upcoming game against Penn State. And like I said, next week should be exciting as we really get into our rivalry and talk some fucking shit. So that should be
I'm excited.
Very, very fun as we get ready for Thanksgiving and that game next Saturday. But don't get too far ahead of ourselves. I'm excited for this week. Huge game, like I said, Penn State, Ohio State, probably the game of the week. I can't really remember the rest of the schedule of a slate of games, but I do think Ohio State, there's a reason why game day is there in Columbus, because that's the game of the week, and should be fun.
They're going to smack Penn State. Penn State on the road under James Franklin, just not the same team. If this game was at home, I'd still pick Ohio State, but Penn State would make it a little more interesting than what they're going to make it. So I definitely think Ohio State is going to come out and bully Penn State a little bit. If you shut down Hamler and keep their tight end in check, really Penn State's offense isn't all that scary. They have some talent at running back, but they're young. Noah Kane, Ricky Slade has been hurt a little bit. They have another running back whose name escapes me. But yeah, in the passing game, if you take out Hamler, which Ohio State has the DBs and defensive scheme to do so, I think they're in a world of hurt, and it's on the road where Franklin is just much different. I think Ohio State is going to just outmatch Penn State.
Yeah, I know. Last matchup in Columbus between the two teams was that, if memory serves, that crazy wild game where Ohio State was getting slaughtered early, and then J.T. Barrett had one of the greatest second-half performances I've ever seen by a quarterback, where I don't think he had an incompletion the entire second half, or something like 16 completions or 18 and straight, and just took over the game. And I remember watching it here in my basement and just thinking, well, Ohio State is toast. And then I think I even tweeted, Ohio State is, and then I had a picture of toast. And then a little bit later, I said, oh boy. And then I had a picture of bread, because it turned from toast to bread. And then it turned into a loaf, almost like reverse toast. But yeah, J.T. Barrett took over, won the game. And now, the last matchup in Columbus, they fought him hard, and I don't really anticipate them to roll over.
They also
or
had
like
Saquon Barkley
and
Trace McSorley, two playmaking.
And they weren't facing the offense and defense that we're seeing this year from Ohio State. But I don't think it's going to be easy, even though it's 18 points. They might roll them, but I hope they don't have that outlook. I hope they're really going to project that. I hope the Ohio State team is looking at Penn State as a more than formidable opponent, and basically the best opponent they have faced up to this point, because it's probably what they are. Wisconsin obviously has been tough, but they rolled them. And I think Penn State's probably better than Wisconsin. So hopefully they see it that way, and they don't let the foot off the gas a little bit and look ahead to the Michigan game, which on the road, coming off the Penn State game, I think is going to be huge. That rivalry is always tight for the most part, especially except for the last couple of weeks. On the road for Ohio State, it's going to be a tough game. I'm looking forward to next week and breaking into that. But Ohio State, handle your business this week, and let's get ready for the game. The game.
I'm excited for next week, man. But I definitely think when you talk about on paper talent, Penn State is the best team that Ohio State will have seen this year. Just on paper, raw ability, whether they're young, upperclassmen, doesn't matter. Penn State has it, but ultimately it's not going to be enough to overcome the machine that Ohio State is, especially at the shoe. So I expect Ohio State to cover that 18-point line.
Let's go. Have to relish in that, the old Michigan fan talking about Ohio State covering a top 10 opponent. Nice. Well, that wraps up this week of Calling the Field Stands. Thanks for listening. As mentioned, you can find us on all of the podcast platforms. We've usually been on YouTube, but I think I've slacked on posting there. It's just the audio. There's no video yet. But next week, as mentioned earlier in the podcast, we do anticipate doing a live stream of our podcast next week. I have a work thing that I need to get prepared for that I said, hey, as good an opportunity as ever to practice for that. And hopefully people watch. If not, that'll be, recapable and watchable post live, I guess. It'll still be watchable there. So if you can go back and watch everything we got going on, see our faces and all that kind of shit. And should be fun next week. Like I said, look out for the Ohio State-Michigan preview. Jeff Mapes being a huge Michigan guy, me being Ohio State all the way. It's going to be fun to really go back and forth and, like I said, talk some shit, break down the game, look at our keys to victory for either side, what we expect, what we anticipate. Should be a huge matchup, great game. Like I said, Ohio State, in my opinion, best team in the country, but going on the road against Michigan, who has really turned their shit around since playing Penn State in that second half, a game that they almost won, weren't able to pull through, but ever since then, they've really been dominant on all facets of the ball. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Looking forward to getting that live stream going. And like I said, finally getting some of that video content that we've been pitching for quite some time now. So we're going to get that up and going, and more to come in future. Maybe if people keep watching and requesting that, we will do more live streaming shit and video our content from here on and do more of that. So keep your eyes posted. Keep your eyes peeled. Thanks for listening. Jeff, it's been a pleasure.
As always, my friend.
See you next week, y'all. Peace.